Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you guys again. And it's nice to be reflecting again. Happy New Year. I hope you had a wonderful New Year's Eve celebration. And today I have a mic with me. I'm not sure if it will be tremendously helpful as far as the audio quality is concerned, but we'll have to go with that. And together with me, I have a friend behind the screen who's shy, but from time to time, she might pose some questions. And I think that's helpful because I'd rather be feeling like I'm speaking with someone than speaking to the screen myself. Now, today we will circle back to the question, which is lessons I've learned from starting a business. In the previous video, I talked about lesson one, the importance of selling. And today I'd like to talk about lesson two. And lesson two is to prioritize self-development. And the concept of self-development is very cliche. We talk about, or rather we see people talk about being the best version of ourselves, to improve ourselves every day and so forth. And although it is cliched, I think there's a lot of utility in self-development. In fact, I think the fact that it's perceived as cliched is a bad thing, because I think that we should pay more attention to self-development. The definition of self-development is very subjective. But for the purpose of illustration, for the purpose of argument, and for the purpose of this particular video, I would like to define self-development as any activity that is effortful, that requires sacrifice, but that would yield a desirable outcome, either in the short term or the long term. And I think many a time, the desirable outcome generated as a result of self-development oriented activities are long term. That could be why we are not very inclined to committing to self-development and instead spending time on indulgent gratifications that bring about immediate pleasure. And unfortunately, I actually have received suboptimal career advice when I was still a university student. In fact, by a lot of my elders who tend to hold different perspectives from my own. And the advice would be along the lines, or rather their lifestyle and opinion would be along the lines of self-development being relegated when you begin to work. So it'd be something like, oh, you're able to exercise regularly right now and read regularly because you're still a student devoid of additional responsibilities and the cognitive demands of work life. When you enter the workforce, on the other hand, you would not have time for additional activities to enrich yourself because you'll be too busy with work. And I think that is not the best way to go about living life, because life is complex and life is tough. We have a range of responsibilities within and beyond the context of work. And if we don't prepare ourselves and equip ourselves with skills to overcome these challenges through self-development, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. And this could be something as simple as, I'll share with you a personal experience of mine. There was a week in November, at the end of November, when all my family members were away for a trip. And only my grandma and I were left in the house. And my grandma needed help to carry a baggage from the third floor of the house to the first, from the third floor of the house to the first. And the baggage was about 20 kilograms. And I was able to do it no problem. And I think what was more reassuring was that she knew I was able to do it no problem. So when she requested for my help, it wasn't like, hey, can you please help to carry this 20 kilogram luggage from the third floor to the first? It was more of like, hey, help me to do that, please. And I went about doing it. And when I was carrying the baggage, I was thinking, oh, I'm able to commit this favor for my grandma because I exercise regularly. I commit to self-development regularly. It's one form of self-development. Otherwise, I'd be struggling to carry the 20 kilogram bag and would not be feeling very good. And that, I guess, is one example of responsibilities outside of work. And I think it's a very thought-provoking one, because responsibilities do not have to be distal, grandiose, large-scale work that we have to do. It could be something as simple as helping a family member out on a regular day. And the favor could be something as small as carrying a baggage. And I guess given that the favor is perceived to be small, if we're not able to commit it because we do not regularly devote ourselves to self-development, we are bound to feel very depressed and sad. So I think it's terrible career advice to think that when you enter the workforce, you do not enhance other aspects of your life, instead committing only to work. I think no matter which stage of life one is at, self-development is absolutely crucial in at least 3 to 4 aspects of your life outside of workplace. So for the purpose of this particular video, and for the purpose of argument, I guess, we will define self-development as having a regimented sleep schedule, diet, exercising regularly, and having intellectual pursuits aside from doing your best at work every day. So that brings me actually to the first sub lesson. Lesson two being to prioritize self-development. And the first sub lesson is that self-development impacts your presence. And when I say presence, I mean metaphorically your presence as being able to solve problems, as well as your presence physically. So one example that I provided in my Substack newsletter was that if you're a business owner or a salesperson and you have a pitch to deliver and you exercise regularly, you're going to be physically attractive from the get-go because you're going to be in shape. And that's not such a bad start, given that people tend to associate physically attractive people with being more credible, more knowledgeable, more trustworthy, and so forth. It's the halo effect. Now, of course, our susceptibility to facades of beauty are not necessarily a good thing, but we can use it to our advantage, especially if we know that we are competent ourselves. Because if you want to maximize your chance at influencing and conviction, why isn't it a bad thing to keep yourself physically attractive? And keeping yourself physically attractive, aside from being hygienic, a very logical step to take is to keep yourself in shape. And if you have a good start as far as impression management is concerned during the pitch, then the likelihood of you confirming the deal increases, statistically speaking. And wouldn't we want to maximize our chances at confirming deals and influencing our stakeholders? And let's take a second step further now. Aside from exercising regularly, you're a business owner who reads and writes regularly, in which case you're going to be able to be more eloquent and articulate when you sell your product, service, and idea, or either one of them. And you're going to show to be able to handle difficult questions well. You're able to solve complex problems well. And I think that's great, not just on the front of facing clients, but also facing your internal team members, because whether you're running a business or holding a managerial position at work as an employee, complex problems will arise. And having an intellectual pursuit will prepare you to be able to ask pertinent questions and approach problems in a manner that is methodical and systematic, that will be beneficial to yourself and the team. So I guess that summarizes, or that encapsulates, the first sub-lesson, that self-development impacts your presence. Now, just for the sake of better illustration, if you're a person who does not have any self-development pursuits outside of work, you're going to be out of shape. You're going to be intellectually blunt because you don't practice thinking and solving problems on a regular basis. And that's not going to be very helpful because what you have at your disposal probably is only work experience, which means that your toolbox is not as full as it could have been. And if you know that you can fill your toolboxes, if you know that you can fill your toolbox with more sharp knives, why wouldn't you want to do that on a regular basis?
So for yourself, how do you create a goal for yourself? Do you create a daily goal or monthly goal?
Okay, well, my friend here at the back has asked, how do I create a goal for myself? I think when I create a goal, I try to make it as measurable and as specific as possible for a start. And the next step would be to have a clear rationale of how it contributes to a larger goal. So for example, I like to wake up between 5:30 and 8 a.m. at least 5 times a week for 2025. So that's really specific and actionable because I know that, well, I have to wake up at a certain time frame for 5 times a week. And if I don't do that, I fail. So by being specific and having the goal stated in a manner that is measurable and actionable, I also simultaneously state the conditions of failure. And it's very important that we know when we have succeeded in attaining the goal or failed in doing so. Because if the conditions of failure and success are not made clear, you are not really aiming at anything. And if you're not aiming at anything, you might as well be aiming at nothing. So that's the first component, ensuring that the goal is specific, measurable, and actionable. So I guess there's another component of it being realistic as well. So I put 5 days, 5 times a week instead of every day for a start, right? And then the difficulty and challenge could increase as time goes by. But the second component of it is how it contributes to a unifying goal. I think that is more of ensuring that you know why you're doing a certain action, because if you're committing to an action and in a manner that is devoid of a long-term valuable reason, then you're likely to lose motivation very quickly as well, and you're likely to not be very disciplined in the long term. And I think that when you do not find meaning in the activities that you do, it's very hard to ensure that it is long term. So in my case, the rationale behind waking up very early is so that I have more time to commit to the activities that I have, because outside of my business, I also have some intellectual goals. For example, pursuing a master's degree in clinical psychology for 2025, completing some difficult books that I've set out for myself, posting on social media at least a few times a week, and so forth. So I hope that answers your question. So the first part being the goal have to be specific, measurable, actionable, and realistic. And the second part being that the goal should contribute to a long-term unifying goal. But of course, if you do not have a long-term unifying goal and you don't know what your long-term goal is, I think that is no reason to stop doing your best. Because I've also learned in my experience since being a student that many a time we do not know what our long-term goal is, and trying to figure it out is not going to get you anywhere. Instead, we should continue working hard, because as you work hard and traverse through life, the goal becomes clearer to you. So I think it's very well. This actually reminds me of a book that I've read, How to Be a Straight A Student. I believe that is the name of the book. How to Be a Straight A Student, or How to Be a A-star Student. I can't remember what the name is, but sorry. Actually, no. I think the book is So Good They Can't Ignore You. Yeah, that is the book. It talks about how it's very rare, or rather, there are very few domains in life where you're able to have a clear long-term goal stated from the get-go. For example, sports, if you're an athlete, you think, I want to become an Olympic gold medalist by 2024, for example. Or if you're a musician, I want to be performing on X stage by this time. For the most part, we don't know what the long-term goal is. Even in my case, starting a business, I found that my long-term goals become more clear as time elapses. But the prerequisite for having the clarity is doing my best every day. So exercising every day, sticking to my diet and sleep schedule so that I'm able to be cognitively sharp and relentlessly devoting myself to my intellectual pursuits so that I have more ideas and more inspiration. So that is the point on having a long-term unifying goal. I hope that answers your question. So that was the first sub-lesson, which is that to keep in mind and remind yourself always that your self-development impacts your presence. And the presence that I'm referring to is both metaphorical and physical and literal. The second sub-lesson of prioritizing self-development is that your self-development is you. Again, literally. And this is a bit of an extension or a very specific example of the first sub-lesson. Now, what do I mean by your self-development is you? I actually learned this from Alex Hormozi, who is a successful entrepreneur, CEO of acquisition.com or owner of acquisition.com. I believe the CEO is his wife. I could be wrong. Now, Alex Hormozi, in one of his very popular tweets, states that your niche is you. And he also provided some examples. He says The Rock loves fitness, acting, philanthropy, and a few other examples. And Alex Hormozi, he loves fitness. He loves teaching people online. He loves, business, investment, scaling, and so forth. And if we really reflect on what the examples mean, the larger picture is that who you are is what you do every day. You are what you eat, for example. Your niche is you. The more time you spend on a particular activity, the more it will define you. If you spend a lot of time doom scrolling every single day, you're going to be someone who is a dopamine addict without any problem-solving skills or unifying goal, unless you do that intentionally, scrolling intentionally, looking for comments to make content, for example. I know. On the other hand, I would like to think that who I am, or rather my long-term niche, is going to be along the lines of business, fitness, psychology, history, literature, because I like to think that I spend a lot of time on them. Now, that does not mean that I'll be a professional in all of these domains, but my brand eventually, my company, will reflect these aspects of my life, which I spend a lot of time committing to. So I would like to think that given your niche is you, there are two things to keep in mind, which is that the first thing is that you should spread yourself out, which is a piece of unpopular opinion because people tend to say that you should specialize, you shouldn't spread yourselves out, otherwise you're going to be a jack of all trades. But I think that if you're interested in a domain, you should do your best to adhere to the activities that allow you to be better at the domain. So for example, I'm interested in fitness. I'm interested in business. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in psychology. I'm interested in literature. So in a day, which has 24 hours, I do my best to spend at least some time on each of these domains. Of course, I prioritize accordingly. I don't spend an equal amount of time on all of them, but I spend enough time on all of them so that I know enough of them to monetize, to navigate life So, and also, of course, to unify them so that they become who I am. And I find that that makes life more interesting. It makes you more interesting. It makes me more interesting. Because then I'm not a person who is unidimensional. I have layers. And when I speak with my stakeholders, I'm able to share different aspects of lessons that I've learned. And often I find that that is effective in ensuring that they find myself interesting, and that's not too unhelpful if I'm doing sales. So your niche is you. And so the first thing is that we shouldn't spread ourselves out. And actually, I think that leads to another point, the second point, which is what Dr. Jordan Peterson would say. Meaning is lost where responsibility is abdicated, something along the lines of that. Meaning that, no pun intended, but he suggests, and I think this suggests, that in every area where you choose to give up on being responsible, you lose an ounce, you lose a proportional ounce of meaning in your life. Yeah, I should repeat that. In any area where you choose to give up on taking responsibility, you lose a proportional ounce of meaning in your life. A concrete example would be, let's say you choose to give up on reading. You choose to give up on being a responsible reader. You then lose all the lessons that you could have learned from being a reader. For example, the lesson you could have learned would be how to write more effectively instead of using cliches. You lose that opportunity, that sense of meaning. Or the lesson could be being more eloquent because your vocabulary bank is richer. You also lose that. And that comes from abdicating the responsibility of reading. So that actually concludes the second sub-lesson, which is that your self-development is you. The less you commit to self-development, the less interesting that you'll be. And I don't mean that, and I don't imply that being interesting is the sole goal that you should aim for. But from my perspective as a business owner, I've learned that because of my responsibilities and commitment to self-development, I'm able to think of more feasible ideas to diversify our streams of income and range of offerings as a brand and as a company. And of course, as a brand myself as well, not just my company. Did you have a question?
So how do you have the motivation to do all these self-development activities outside of work?
That's a very good question. So the question is how I have the motivation to commit to self-development or different aspects of self-development outside of work. I think it's very important to clarify that people and I don't feel motivated every single day. So a large part of that is discipline. You actually have to do. So Rob Henderson defines discipline as doing what you have to do, even when you do not feel like doing it, or even when you do not feel good. I think it's a pretty good habit to have, and discipline can be cultivated. So the more time you do things, even though you don't feel like doing them, the more disciplined you will learn to be. I think that discipline can be learned, although I also think that a large part of it is genetic. Conscientiousness, the personality trait conscientiousness, specifically dutifulness and industriousness, for example, are what we perceive to be discipline in our role. Now, we have to be disciplined. That's a given. So I was reading another article by Andrew Huberman who talked about the middle problem. So in the beginning, you're motivated when you start an activity, but eventually you'll encounter the middle problem, which is that as time elapses, you lose motivation. So you have to be disciplined. So learn to be disciplined. That's probably a good start. And you do that really easily by looking at parts of your life where there are difficulties. For example, waking up at a designated time. You commit to waking up, even though it's difficult. Well, that's a good start to developing discipline. Then the second part of my answer to the question of how I feel motivated committing to these different aspects of self-development would be to, again, have a long-term unifying goal. And if you do not have a long-term unifying goal, then let the goal be having clarity. So there's a component of faith there, which is that the more I commit to these long-term goals, the more I commit to these, I should repeat that. So if you do not have a long-term goal, let your long-term goal be having clarity in what your long-term goal is. So there's a component of faith there. And what you want to tell yourself is that by committing to these aspects of self-development every single day or on a regular basis, I will have more clarity as to what my long-term goal will be. I think that's probably a good start. So to summarize is to have discipline, to practice having discipline by doing things that you don't feel like doing, and to remind yourself either of your already established long-term goal, or remind yourself that your long-term goal could be having clarity into what the long-term goal should be. I hope that answers your question, by the way. All right, that actually summarizes and concludes the second aspect of self-development, second sub-lesson of self-development, which is that your self-development is you. And the third and final sub-lesson of prioritizing self-development is that self-development staves off anxiety. And I think I have illustrated that with my example earlier with my grandma, where I say that because I exercise every day, I was able to help her carry the 20-kilogram baggage from the third floor of the house to the first. That is a very specific example, and you kind of have to think philosophically to see how that applies to self-development, staving off anxiety. Now, I think to understand the third sub-lesson, there's an assumption that we have to make, and I don't think it's such a bad assumption, which is that life is filled with a lot of challenges. Life is filled with a lot of challenges. So if you are developed in more aspects of your life, for example, your health, your intellectual capacity, your fitness, then you are more prepared for the various challenges of life. And if you commit to different aspects of self-development on a regular basis, you're by definition challenging yourself regularly. And that builds self-efficacy, which is confidence in yourself. Because if you have overcome many challenges, then you kind of tell yourself behaviorally on a regular basis that, hey, I'm overcoming challenges every day, I'm facing challenges every day, and I'm showing myself that I'm able to manage these challenges every day. So we talk about how you can learn to be disciplined by practicing activities that reflect discipline. By the same token, you can also develop the ability to overcome challenges by facing and trying to overcome more challenges on a regular basis. So instead of living in comfort and indulgence and hedonism on a daily basis, you put yourself in challenges every single day, reflective of self-development. And as a result, when real or bigger challenges do arise, you feel prepared because you feel that this is my bread and butter. I'm doing this every single day. So I don't have to feel more anxious than I need to, for example. On the other hand, if you don't face any challenges every single day, then any little challenge that arises in your life, in or outside of work, is going to be perceived as too daunting to handle. So self-development staves off anxiety. And in the context of business, if I'm able to assert that self-development has contributed to financial attainments in my business, then I'm by definition also stating that self-development is helping me stave off the anxiety of not able to pay my team members and put food on the table, for example. So that actually is a large component of starting a business, not being able to pay for your team members. So because I've been able to benefit from self-development, I'm able to stave off that particular form of anxiety. Let me know if you have any questions on self-development, staving off anxiety.
No.
No, all that's great. So that actually concludes lesson 2 of lessons learned from starting a business. So lesson 2 is that we should prioritize self-development. The first lesson being that self-development impacts our presence. Second lesson being our self-development is us, that our niche is us. And the third sub-lesson being self-development staves off anxiety. And with that, I close off the second lesson of lessons I've learned from starting a business. If you enjoyed the video and have learned from it, please do leave a comment to boost the algorithm. I hope that this video has been helpful. And please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. And again, Happy New Year.